What is at stake in Ukraine is not just Ukraine and its people, but the fate of Russia and of Europe as a whole. Let me make, before I join the discussants, the panelists, let me make some remarks as an introduction to the subject we are supposed to deal with. Lubomira Rayeva of Naumann Foundation's Sophia office, in her brilliant concept paper, wrote that Europe, since the Cold War, has never been more challenged internally and externally to preserve its liberal values, identity, integrity, and most of all, peace than today. And I think we all agree with that. The biggest challenge we face today is war. War has returned to Europe, to its eastern part. There we are witnessing not only a conflict, as some like to call it, especially in Western Europe and in Germany, but a real war, fought with heavy weapons and with thousands of victims. A war waged by Russia, or as I should probably better say, by the Kremlin, against Ukraine, in Ukraine. I would like to point to this fact right at the beginning of our deliberations, and with full intent, because many people, in particular in Western Europe, obviously have got accustomed to this war, and as a consequence, more often than not, keep silent about it. In my view, they should be reminded that what is at stake in Ukraine is not just Ukraine and its people, but the fate of Russia and of Europe as a whole. There are, of course, many other challenges below the level of open war. Taken together, they are the reason why the Naumann Foundation for Freedom is asking whether we need a new security policy for Eastern Europe. When we try to figure out what is the overall nature, the character of the challenges we are facing, we are thrown back to the old truism, there are more questions than answers. But questions have, of course, to be asked in order to get closer to answer to our fundamental question. Let me just mention a few of these questions. The first question sounds strange, but it isn't. What is meant by Eastern Europe? Is it a territorial notion, or a political concept? Or is it an idea? Is it, as someone has called it, a sort of Neverland because nobody can specifically explain it? Second, and in connection with this point, is there such thing like security for Eastern Europe? Is a security policy conceivable which would be exclusively designed for Eastern Europe? Are isolated security arrangements possible to which only Eastern European states subscribe? I am referring with this, of course, to the concept of intermarium, an old concept which surfaced and was reinvented, so to speak, in the last years. We have here with us one of the designers of the founders of this concept, and he will surely address us at his given time. This is Mr. Umland, Andreas Umland. Then the question, what concretely represents a threat, and which notion or concept of security would correspond to it? We have, of course, military threats, many of them, which means that without defense, and in particular without deterrence, security for Eastern Europe will be a fragile affair. But should we concentrate all our efforts on military security alone, given the fact that there are threats of a different kind, political and economic ones, threats which may be as dangerous as the military ones, and in some cases even more dangerous. So wouldn't we, against this background, agree on a wider notion of security, on a more comprehensive security concept? Then we have the European dimension. As Donald Tusk rightly points out, the unity of the 27 or still 28 members of the European Union is our most precious asset. This unity is, I would add, also the basis for the security of Eastern Europe. But this unity and this solidarity, which is inextricably linked with it, have, as you know, been under severe strain in recent years. And what about the so-called Europe of different speeds? The concept widely discussed these days. Wouldn't such an arrangement separate Eastern and Western Europe from each other also in the area of security, thereby seemingly confirming the myth that Western Europe would be ready to distance itself from its eastern part? And is the excitement over the projected renewed collaboration regarding a reinvigoration of the project Europe between the newly elected president of France and Germany's chancellor another reflection of Western Europe being understood as Europe, that is, without according Eastern Europe its due place and standing? Another important question, which is of concern not only, but in particular for East European states, is energy. We here at this meeting are, I presume, aware of the fact that the supply of energy in Europe is not only a matter of economics, but also, and maybe in the first place, a matter of security. Finally, what about the means by which security should be achieved? We all know the mantra of, we are hearing time and again, dialogue. Can this really be the one and only means of achieving security, as is widely claimed by left-leaning parts of the political spectrum? Are arms control agreements worth pursuing, and actually worth the paper on which they are written, when, as it seems, the Kremlin is not prepared to accept any restriction to its military might and ambitions? How much space is there for serious negotiations with binding outcomes when Russia's rulers seem to have chosen military strength as the overriding guiding principle for both their domestic and foreign policies? I'd rather stop here, although, as you can imagine, I could continue to raise still other questions. At the end of my introduction to this panel, allow me please to add a short remark with regard to Germany and to how Eastern Europe, as well as Russia, are being perceived there in Germany in times of reviving Russian revisionism. According to Czesław Miłosz, the Polish poet and writer born in Lithuania, there are various possibilities to classify people. One way is to divide them in those who do know Russia and those who don't. Miłosz points out that in dealing with certain aspects of our political life, you have to know Russia, otherwise you will not be able to judge what is going on. To my mind, the security of Eastern Europe belongs to these affairs. Without thorough knowledge of Russia, of the current regime, of the Kremlin's rulers and their goals, we will not be able to come to recognize, let alone solve, the problems in this field. Unfortunately, in Germany, most people, including the political class, do not have such a clear understanding of Russia. Nevertheless, almost everybody in Germany talks about Russia without restraint, thereby displaying strong convictions. Problems where Russia is involved should be approached with soft power only, and treating matters of importance without or even against Russia is ruled out from the start. Most important, Germans, while mostly mistrusting Putin, are too often willing to make excuses for Russia and its behavior. At the same time, also knowledge of Eastern Europe is not very common in Germany, to put it mildly. It is widely ignored that not only Russia, but also East European countries were victims of Nazi Germany's aggression, even the first victims. Thus, the fact that Germany's historical responsibility embraces not only Russia, but also Poland, Ukraine, the Baltic, and other East European states does not really, it seems to me, belong to the collective political wisdom of Germans. Likewise, almost nobody in Germany knows that the Russian elites reject any notion of Russia bearing a historical responsibility vis-à-vis the East Europeans. Thus, the public discussion on foreign and security policy within Germany is suffering from a predominance of Russia, while Eastern Europe is to a large degree left behind. This imbalance in public awareness has, as many Germans, in particular from the liberal part of the political spectrum, have come to recognize, to be corrected in favor of the East European states, whose success depends to a large extent on how politics develops in the West. Such an effort would also be, as I will argue, an important contribution towards enhancing the security of Eastern Europe and of Europe as a whole. And to my mind, this seminar is an essential step in this direction.